Welcome back to Terms of Service. I'm Claire Duffy. If you spent any time on the internet recently, you have almost certainly seen an uptick in content generated by AI. Whether it's an AI video of a cat riding a motorcycle, like I saw this morning, or an image that doesn't look quite right coming across your Facebook feed, or maybe you've seen one of those LinkedIn posts that was definitely not written by a human. What does it mean for all of us when the lines between human-created and AI-generated start to blur, and more of our feeds are filled with this artificial content? And how can we distinguish between what's real and fake? To help us sort this out, I have Henry Eider here with me today. Henry is an expert on AI and deepfakes. He's the co-creator of the University of Cambridge's AI in Business program, and he served as an advisor on AI for organizations ranging from Meta to the World Economic Forum. Henry, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So the biggest news in the sort of AI-generated content space in the last few weeks has been OpenAI launching its AI video app, Sora. It's sort of like a TikTok feed, but AI-generated videos. Are you on Sora?
So it's a little bit difficult to get on Sora here in the UK. It's currently US exclusive, but I have been tinkering with some VPNs to, let's say, cross the pond virtually. So I've used it a little bit, not as much as I'd like to really get under the bonnet. One thing I have done, Claire, is I've actually drawn on all of my friends saying, look, I know you guys are coming across a huge amount of this kind of AI slop content, particularly stuff generated by Sora, and I want you to share it with me as you come across it in your brain rot sessions, as they refer to it. And so I've seen the whole gamut from really quite awful stuff, very racist, homophobic, all the way through to stuff which is just plain ridiculous, and some stuff which can be quite engaging, quite fun. But I think it's safe to say that Sora 2 has really changed the landscape of generative video and how this content is being circulated, and critically how it's also being created.
And Sora videos are obviously what many people are talking about right now, but it's certainly not the only kind of AI-generated content that we've seen sort of taking over the internet. Give us a highlight reel, if you will, of where and how we're seeing AI-generated content show up right now.
So since kind of early 2018, I've been doing what I refer to as like AI and deepfake cartography. I've been mapping the landscape. And it's safe to say over the last 2-3 years, there has been this absolutely kind of monumental shift in the kinds of content we're seeing going out into the world using AI-generated tool sets. So we're seeing people creating text-to-speech voice clones. We're seeing people using voice skinning tools or voice-to-voice tool sets. We're seeing people generating highly realistic AI-generated image sets. So that could be with tools like Midjourney. That could be with some of the other tools like Imagen from Google. And then, of course, we're seeing the video space really changing. And that's not just whole cloth generation of wacky, weird videos. That's also really interesting tools that use existing videos to drive animations, as it's called. So you can take a video of us right now and you could skin it to make it look like we're at a Tudor court or in a cyberpunk dystopia, right? The amount of tools out there is endless now. It used to be the case that I could spend a couple of hours a day, 2-3 hours a day, maybe looking at the new research papers, looking at the new tools being released, and I could be confidently on top of the generative landscape. Now there are teams of hundreds of people working on this, trying to get on top of it, and I don't think anyone truly can. And the danger right now is people are saying, oh my God, haha, this slop content, it's so low effort. And they're not realizing that actually maybe, 1 in 10, 1 in 20 of the videos they're watching that they don't think is slop content is still actually AI generated.
Right.
So navigating the landscape's become much more difficult.
Yeah, this was something I was thinking about is like, you've been able to create AI-generated photos, AI-generated content for some time now. They weren't very good up until recently. But I was sort of pondering, like, why is this sort of takeover of the internet happening now? And is it because AI-generated content becomes more valuable or meaningful the more realistic it gets?
It's a really good question. And I don't think we can say it's immediately realism, because some of the videos that are going viral are clearly ridiculous, right? Clearly absurd. For example, the one that went kind of quite big a few months ago was the ASMR of kind of glass fruit being cut with a knife. Clearly not real. People knew that wasn't authentic, but it was still interesting. It still maybe was, satisfying what good ASMR should do. It's something that catches people's imagination. The realism of the outputs doesn't necessarily mean that they're photorealistic. You think it's real, it's actually happened, but it's maybe about the physics being consistent. It's about the spatiotemporal consistency working. That is, over time, things react and behave as they should. It's why I think Demis Hassabis, when he kind of showed off Veo 3, which was Google's model, which really set this kind of new age of video going, in my opinion. One of the examples he showed off was onions sizzling in a pan. And the sound was consistent, the kind of the physics of what the pan and the onions and the oil did were consistent. So even if you're creating ridiculous things, you're creating ridiculous things that kind of make sense within our understanding of how the world works. I think the fact that we can now generate semantically consistent audio at the same time as video, it makes it pop, it makes it more visceral in a way that previously just wasn't the case.
That point about the sort of realism is so interesting. Like there's less of that like uncanny valley thing where you look at, say, an AI generated photo a few years ago, you'd look at it and someone's hands would look really weird and messed up. And you're like, even if you know the new ones are fake, you at least they're not so weird. For people who haven't tried it, explain the process of making an AI generated video now.
If we fast forward back to late 2017, early 2018, when kind of deepfakes, the term was first coined and generative video was really starting to enter the sort of hobbyist dimension, I guess we can say. That was for face swapping. So you'd be specifically taking a video and you'd be swapping one face into that piece of content. At that time, it was mostly non-consensual image abuse against women, a problem that persists to this day. Those tools were incredibly clunky to use. You would have to gather tens, if not hundreds of images, clean that up, align the faces in those screenshots or those frames, and then run it through a model, which was very janky, as we'd say, to use. It wasn't easy to kind of navigate. Now those tool sets for face swapping are pretty accessible. They're much easier than they were, but a lot of people just don't bother with face swapping when you can use tools like Veo 3.1 or Sora 2 or Flux or Kling or some of these other models out there. What you do is as if you were generating text with ChatGPT, you purely prompt for it. You are given the option to provide some direction depending on how much you want to go into the details. And off you go. You press a button and your output is generated, often with the top models now within minutes. One of the extra things that also comes in, particularly with Sora 2, is that there is this cameo feature, which allows you to swap real people who have consented to their likeness being used into footage as well as yourself, which is notable compared to some of the previous models that have come before.
On the back end, what goes into improving the quality of this content? Like, how have these tools gotten so much better so quickly?
So I don't really have the kind of the inside baseball on kind of what they've exactly done. That's kind of a secret source that hasn't been made widely available, or at least certainly the kind of the details haven't been disclosed by the companies that are really pushing it forwards. But I think certainly we're seeing, compared to, again, 3-4 years ago, the ability to generate that photorealistic output clearly suggests more data being put into the models, right? Much higher quality data than previously was available, perhaps. I think we're also probably seeing a lot more computational resource being dedicated than prior efforts to just brute force it. That's certainly how we've seen a lot of the kind of AI revolution of the last 6-7 years or so being pushed, is just by throwing more data and more compute at these kind of problem sets, at generating better video or better audio. So I don't know exactly how they've done this in terms of new architectures or how they've kind of strung models or classifiers together. What I can say, though, is it's really easy to kind of prompt something quite naive, quite basic. But when you want something with incredibly fine-grained detail, right, you really want everything in a shot or a scene to be perfect, that's where you start to run into issues. And this is similar to some of the image generation models too. So if you're trying to style it for a certain kind of shot, which is then persistent across a scene, and you want kind of characters to come in and out of frame, you want certain kinds of lines to be delivered in certain manners, that's when it gets a little bit more challenging. But again, moving forward, I'm sure we're going to see fine-tuning of these kinds of models for specific purposes like this.
Yeah, that's such a good point, too. And just like the amount of data that these systems need to work well. Sora 2 is very good at creating depictions of Sam Altman and making him look like he really does and sound like he really does. But for people for whom it has less data, it's not as good at making them look how they really do. One
of the points that actually came out to me speaking to a correspondent at the BBC who was doing a report on this, who has brown skin, was saying that it really struggled to recreate his cameo well. And it particularly struggled to give him an English accent that sounded like he actually did, because it kind of almost kept failing to kind of match together those two parts of his identity. And so I think that's something that I've heard reported. I can't speak for it myself, obviously not being able to kind of test across a diverse range of individuals. But there is a kind of a concern that seems to be emerging on a small scale here, but is part of a broader concern that in a kind of an AI first world where avatars are potentially a big part of how we communicate online, we might have a kind of almost like a second class citizen category where white people are hyper realistically represented with fine-tuned details, and people of ethnic minority backgrounds don't get the same kind of quality of avatar, which is something that I think a lot of these companies are certainly aware of, but certainly need to keep working on.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, we've talked about how bias can show up in AI systems in a number of ways, but if the companies don't make a concerted effort to train these models with certain kinds of data that are representative of diverse groups of people, the outputs of these models might also struggle to be representative of the world. I'm curious, Meta released a standalone scrolling feed of AI-generated videos even before OpenAI launched the Sora app, and people kind of mocked it. It did not take off in the way that Sora did. Why do you think Sora worked so much better?
It's a good question. Yeah, so I think it was Meta Vibes, right, was the name of the app. Just simply put, Sora 2, the quality of the model was better. I also think that not being able to clone yourself in the same way and not being able to critically clone someone like Sam Altman, who opened up his likeness for anyone to use as they wished within the bounds of the model in terms of its safety measures, that was just the perfect viral concoction. Whereas when you saw more of the kind of stuff that was coming out on Vibes, which was a little bit more kind of typically anime, not hyper realistic, not featuring well-known individuals, it doesn't catch your attention in the same way. So I think the ability to use it on yourself and indeed of celebrities and critically deceased individuals, which is a huge ethical can of worms. I think it was just perhaps a slightly better executed launch of a more powerful tool with broader functionality.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. Like, people are okay with artificial content, but they would like to see people that they know, to see real people depicted in that artificial content. That, for whatever reason, makes for a more compelling offering. You talked about the point about deceased individuals being depicted in this AI-generated content, which I want to talk about a little bit more, in part just because it sort of raises this question around who can consent to their likeness being reflected. Last week, OpenAI announced that they were pulling back on the ability to create AI depictions of Martin Luther King Jr. on Sora, and that came after MLK Jr.'s daughter, Bernice King, called on people to stop sending her AI-generated videos of her late father. How do we work through this issue? And it also strikes me that even if OpenAI decides to pull back on this, they've shown that it's possible. And so almost certainly we're going to see other companies with lower standards continue to make this possible, right?
Yeah, this is, in my view, one of the most devilish ethical challenges that we're sort of dealing with right now as we see this dynamic continuing to increasing speed, to be honest, around companies competing and trying to be on the top of the leaderboards or the kind of the download charts, whatever it might be. We have definitely seen, in my view, a change in what companies are perhaps willing to release compared to even just a few years ago, in terms of how risque they are, how much they potentially challenge what society sees as kind of comfortable or ethically sound, really kind of solid grounding. I talk about this use of AI to generate deceased individuals in kind of two ways. So one is sort of synthetic resurrection. And I think this is closer to a format where you perhaps have something done with an estate or the family members of a deceased individual, which is done in consultation with them and is really put with emphasis on respecting the individual who's deceased. It's done thoughtfully. The alternative to this is what I call techromancy. And this is this idea that we almost wantonly puppeteer the dead and make them kind of dance for us, for our entertainment. And I think this is closer to a lot of what I see kind of coming out on Sora 2, is closer to techromancy than kind of respectful synthetic resurrection. So the problem is we cannot get informed consent for the synthetic generation of each deceased individual in every instance, right? They're dead. We can't ask them. We can, like Robin Williams, who was very ahead of his time, put in our will that we don't want people to bring us back in some form after we die. But there are many people who haven't had that choice. So my attitude is, I don't think we're going to be able to stop this happening completely, but we need to make sure that there are clear procedures and protocols as to how it should be done.
Zooming out just a little bit, what's in it for the companies that are making this technology? Like many of these AI-generated content tools, Sora, Vibes, are currently free. Why do they want us creating this AI content?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's worth saying that I think Sora 2 in particular is costing OpenAI a lot of money.
Lots of money, billions of dollars in data center investments.
But in terms of why they're doing it, I mean, I think there are a couple of reactions I have. One is, the idea of the attention economy is pretty well established now. And that by, gaining attention, you are ultimately gaining power, you're gaining political currency, you're gaining commercial currency. And I think the format that OpenAI have taken here is they will have no doubt seen the popularity of some of these AI-generated videos on mainstream platforms, right? For some people, it's 1 in 3 videos now, if not even more, are AI-generated, right? And the way that these algorithms work, particularly for TikTok, it's so potently known for this, is that it knows what you want. It knows what's going to keep you looking. It knows what is going to keep you engaged. And so the reason that people are getting so many of them is because they're actually engaging with them, or, certainly over time, they're engaging with them. So I think these companies are saying, well, look, why should we just control the means of production and not also the means of distribution, right? So I think it's that combination of the attention economy, drawing people to this content on your terms, on your platform, and recognizing that this kind of video, despite the fact it's controversial, despite the fact that it's polarizing, the numbers speak for themselves. This is clearly gaining traction amongst some people. I think the key challenge that these businesses and these organizations are going to need to try and figure out, though, is how much of this is novelty, how much of this has staying power, and will people ultimately get bored or just become apathetic towards this sort of stuff? And will it actually lead to more growing backlash in the long term, even if it leads to short-term gain in the immediate? It's about getting traction, customer growth, consumer growth, users, and then you figure out the monetization at a later date. So I think there's probably some of that going on too.
What does it mean for all of us that more and more of what we're seeing online is artificial? What does it mean for us that more of our media that we're consuming is this AI-generated content?
So I think one of the big things here is a kind of reality apathy. And I think this is something that by no means is brand new, but I think is being accelerated by AI-generated content. Now, I think it's worth saying, Claire, we've lived in a synthetic world for a very long time. Really, since media has existed, we've tried to manipulate it. The digital age, obviously, tools like Photoshop and others have been around for a long time. Many people don't recognize that computational photography is ubiquitous with most flagship smartphones. When you take a picture and say no filter, really, there's a huge amount of algorithmic work still going on to shape the image you take. Synthetic media is everywhere. It's already part of our daily lives. I think what has changed is how transformative that kind of synthetic media can be, and also how whole cloth generative much of the tools now available are as well. So I think that kind of flood of this content with a much higher level of sophistication to what was previously available has led to a kind of an awareness, right? I think there is this sort of moment of people going, oh, I really can't trust what I see and hear anymore, because look at what I'm coming across on my feed on a daily basis. That's why I think you've seen such a huge spike in people saying, hey, Grok, is this real? On X or on
As if Grok is
Twitter.
Well, judge of what's real.
And this is Musk has said that Grok will be able to do this, and perhaps they are working on making Grok a better digital forensic classifier. But at the moment, it's not designed to do that. And it worries me precisely, as you just kind of indicated, Claire, that people are relying on this. But it shows they want to know. Right? They are asking because they want to know. And right now, with the landscape as it stands, there aren't a huge amount of ways I can categorically give someone confidence in the authenticity of what they're looking at. Sometimes there are still clear tells, but there aren't clear enough tells anymore across the board that we can rely on them. And what's the reality in that situation? Well, it's people saying, oh, I can't tell, so I'm going to go with my gut. It doesn't matter. They wouldn't say this.
Whoever I like is real. Whoever I don't like, maybe that video is AI generated.
Precisely. I can't tell if this is AI or not, but I don't think they would ever say that, right? And it's interesting because we've seen this across the political spectrum from the left and the right, people clearly wanting to believe certain videos which suit their political perspective are real. And this is something that was quite well encapsulated on Joe Rogan's podcast recently, where he reacted to a video of Tim Ward's AI video of him, I think, dancing kind of strangely. And I think, paraphrasing here, but I think Joe Rogan's response was kind of like, oh, he's kind of creepy, he's kind of weird. And the person said, on his show, I think that's actually AI generated. And he was like, oh yeah, you're right. But you know what? That's the kind of thing he would do though. Right?
Yeah.
And I think this is the worry I have with this reality apathy. There's this sense of kind of revelatory truth that AI can provide where you can know it's fake and you still find it impacting your view of the world, of political candidates, of celebrities, of your family, whoever it might be. And that's something that is concerning to me, is that if we lose that ability to know what's real or not, it's the same as saying our biases get free rein.
You serve as an advisor to some of the big companies making and using this technology. What are you telling them in terms of how they should be doing this responsibly? And I wonder if there are certain things that you think this technology shouldn't be able to generate. Like one of the most popular sort of formats we've seen on Sora since it launched is these fake videos of someone being pulled over by cops or CCTV video showing people stealing things. Like are there clear lines that need to be drawn here in your mind?
There are challenges because sometimes we want to allow certain kinds of content, which in some contexts is allowable. You know, maybe we want to be able to show a video of someone stepping out of a fast car and greeting their friend, right? Or, you know, kind of in fancy dress or something like this. At the same time, we really clearly don't want to be creating content which is, you know, potentially incriminating for the subject being targeted. We definitely don't want that to be of people who haven't consented to their likeness being used in that way. Now, the good news is that a lot of these models have gone onto some fairly robust safety testing to avoid things like pornographic content, certain kinds of violence, certain kinds of child abuse content, certain kinds of phrases, racial slurs and things like this. But that's really the bare minimum, right? You know, I don't think we should be applauding companies for just doing that. And there is an expectation in my mind to do more. Now, the problem is that particularly when they do inevitably reach a global audience, there are so many different contexts on the local level that you have to be accounting for that it's really difficult to not do that without effectively human moderation. And so it's a very classic problem for a lot of these companies in terms of how do we get the balance right between freedoms of speech, what people should and should not be able to generate, and then how do we critically kind of moderate it using either automated classifiers and having humans in the loop. You know, I think that a lot of these companies need to be doing a bit better on this, to be honest. We need a little bit more of a iterative and more thoughtful approach, which with the kind of current arms race dynamic is challenging. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. Do you have tips for people about how to navigate this new world of AI-generated content filling our feeds, how to tell what's real or what's not? Or do we need to just sort of like let go of trying to do that and go about trying to verify if events really happened or people really said these things?
I was worried you'd ask me this, Claire. And it's one that I'm asked if I had a pound or a dollar, I'd be doing well. This is a really tricky question to answer. Because as I said, there is a kind of nihilism or a kind of apathy that can be created if we don't give people a sense of empowerment or a way out of the problem. But right now, I think there is an overestimation of the ability of particularly free deepfake detection tools online. Those that are typically highly accessible are the ones that are least reliable. And I've worked on cases, real cases with real stakes, such as a conflict in Myanmar where an allegedly deepfake video of a minister giving a confession was circulating. And I actually worked with Sam Gregory from the human rights organization Witness, who's brilliant on these topics. And we found that it was real, but people thought it was a deepfake and a detection tool had told them it was a deepfake, giving them even more false confidence. So I have concerns about the widespread use of unreliable detection systems. There's things like digital nutrition labels, so being able to provide provenance about a piece of media, how it's been created, what tools have been used, when that was, perhaps how it's been changed since. But right now, adoption is low. And for example, with Sora 2, that had this metadata attached. But because so many platforms don't support it right now, many people didn't even know it was there. I think most people still don't. Right? So at the moment, what I have to try and do is tell people, well, look, you can't be a digital Sherlock. It's not fair for me to tell you it is your responsibility to learn to do something that I struggle with now as someone who's been working on this for almost 8 years. It is not fair for your mum, your grocer, your lawyer, your best friend to try and become that digital Sherlock. It's not going to happen. And it can do more harm than good again as the signs I tell you to look for get trained out of these models. Back in 2018, it was deepfakes don't blink. And then within a few months, deepfakes were blinking. But all of those articles and all of those podcasts where people were asked what they should look for, which is why I'm not going to say, Claire, stayed online. So what we need is more energy from the companies, from government, from civil society, from stakeholders, and from everyday people demanding more of this digital trust infrastructure to help them navigate this new synthetic world in a way where they can view AI content. It's not that it's inherently bad. It's not a guilty omission, but it's giving them the informed position to make a judgment themselves about how they feel about the content that they're viewing from a place of actually having that knowledge, not having to make a guess based on their gut.
Well, Henry, thank you so much for doing this. This is such an important conversation, and I'm sure that we could check in 6 months and things will have changed again. But
absolutely.
But I really appreciate
we remain
your time.
on the slop front lines. I'm sure we can speak again in a year and it'll be very different.